Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks very much for coming. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for bringing me to this incredible venue. I speak at a lot of different events around the world, and this is one of the most dramatic and beautiful places that I've spoken in so far. I'm going to talk about embracing the power of disruption and the newly possible. I think we live in an era with incredible technology that allows us to do profound new things. And I'm here to try and get us excited by it. A key thing to note is that many people go around the world and they talk about the pace of change. And they talk about how fast things are changing. And they talk about how different everything is. And everything appears to be the next big thing, whether it's blockchain, whether it's hash graph, whether it's voice, whether it's artificial intelligence. People generally say the same stuff. And I'm here to kind of be irritating and different. I'm here to be challenging. You get paid a lot of money if you say the same stuff as other people. So I'm here to try and create some conversation and some debate about this. Is this working yet? Okay. Two of these key themes that are going to come out today are these two words. One is disruption, and one is digital transformation. And I'm aware these are terms that everyone is talking about right now, and neither of them have been particularly well defined. So I'm here to try and make sense of this. I'm here to try and provide simplicity in this world of chaos. The first one I can describe using this little game, okay? So if I ask you all to think right now about the quickest production car in the world, this is a car that can accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in less than 2.5 seconds. You probably come up with images like this in your head. This is a Porsche, extremely expensive, huge, powerful engine, very low to the ground, a very impractical but fast car, and wildly expensive. Even faster is the Bugatti Veyron Special Edition. Even less practical, even more expensive. And this comes from a car company with over 108 years' experience of making vehicles. This is what we expect an extremely fast car to look like. Even faster, again, is LaFerrari. Again, a company with a huge pedigree of making incredible cars. Fits 2 people. Would struggle to park this in any sensible car park, would struggle to get over any speed bumps if you have them here. And this is what fast cars look like. Like, we all know in our minds that this is how you make a fast car. You have a lot of experience making cars, you put in a huge petrol engine, you make it very low to the ground, and you make sure that not many people can fit in it. That's how it goes. Until recently. So the very, very fastest, there's some arguments about this, but by most measures, the very quickest car in the world right now is this car. It's a Tesla. It's surprisingly practical, surprisingly cheap. It doesn't look like a sports car, and it's by a company with about 10 years' experience making vehicles now. And the most extraordinary thing of all is it got faster overnight and free of charge to all owners thanks to a software update. Now, that's not how cars work. This is my car here. It's fine. It's now displaying every single form of warning light that a car can. And I can promise you, every day I wake up and I get in it, it is not better than how it was before. It's got worse. Now, something very interesting is happening. Like, how is it that a brand new company has entered this space, made significant changes to all of the assumptions that we've had, and done something radically different and transformative and kind of taken over the world? For me, that's the power of this thing called disruption. I'm going to explain that in more depth. So today's presentation, we're going to go through this journey of 4 parts. I'm going to introduce myself and my role a little bit more. Then I'm going to explain a bit more properly what was happening with that concept of disruption. Then I'm going to talk about digital transformation. And I'm going to leave us all with 6 things to do, or 6 ways to think about these 2 chapters. There's not time for a Q&A today, by the way, so I will be hanging around afterwards. So if, as I hope, my presentation makes you think, and makes you challenge what you believe. If I tell you things that you disagree with, I would love the opportunity to discuss those in depth later on. So my job. I think most people think that my job looks a little bit like this. It's about the future. There's flying cars. There's neon lights. It's a little bit dystopian. Like, this is what we sort of envisage people who talk about the future to do. But that's not really what I do. Other people think it's about robots and artificial intelligence, and everything's very futuristic looking and a bit scary. Again, that's not really what I do. Other people think I just make stuff that's a bit fun. This is Pizza Hut in the US. They've launched a pair of trainers that you can order pizzas from just by pressing a button on the tongue. You kind of press the button and a margarita pizza flies towards you, I think. I don't do that either. So what do? This is what I do. I look at how people are behaving. This is a computer screen in a library in the UK. And you probably can't see it that clearly here, but these are sweat marks. Small children have come up to this screen and tried to touch it, and they've been disappointed by it. This is what I study. I study the kind of anthropology of technology. Like, how does technology change the way we feel about life? How does it change the way that we behave? How does it change our expectations of the world and of businesses in it? So it's much more about people than the technology. And I find this fascinating, because anyone in the audience right now with small kids knows that kids grow up in an age where the moment they experience technology that's amazing, everything else is disappointing to them. Every single form of screen that you can't touch is disappointing. Every magazine that's not connected to the internet is a bit rubbish. Every car that isn't powered by electricity is somewhat disappointing. And it's that gap that we need to be interested in. It's that gap between what is possible and what is routinely experienced, which is the tension which we must explore. So I get quite irritated. I get irritated with bad customer experience. I get irritated with the nonsense that people say on stage. So I start writing. I've now written over 600 articles for different publications. And again, I do tend to be quite challenging in them. I wrote this quote. This is my claim to fame. Most of the places I speak in the world, people have seen this, and they don't realize that I'm the weirdo behind it. And that led me to write a book, which is all about what technology means and how companies need to rethink what they do around the newly possible. Okay, so understanding disruption. So let me do this properly this time. When you design something, you need constraints. Like, any creative process has some form of brief and is hemmed in by possibilities. If you were to say to an artist, just do some art, it's not going to work out. There's too many open-ended criteria. You need to say, please paint something, this is a wall, or this is a budget, or this is a time frame. And the same is true for graphic design, or architecture, or product design, or any form of creative process. You have to have constraints. And design then tends to follow a kind of iterative process. I call them kind of evolutionary funnels, because they're rather like how species adapt over time. What happens is you have this kind of brief or a job to be done. It may be to make a new game. It may be to create a logo. It may be to design a building. It may be to make an advertising campaign. And we have these things called assumed criteria, which is what help us funnel our idea to a better or optimum solution. And these criteria may be things like budgets. It may be things like time. It may be the size it has to be. It may be things like material science, things like gravity. These things really tend to help us refine a design. And let me show you this sort of process in action with a bit of nostalgia. So I don't know how many of you in the room had this Walkman, but this was the first ever Walkman in the entire planet. I think it was brought out in, 1981 by Sony, and it kind of changed our attitude towards music. Like, all of a sudden, we could put music on, we could take it with us. Music kind of became the soundtrack to the way that we lived our life. But it was incredibly expensive, and it was massive, and it didn't have rechargeable batteries, and the sound quality wasn't that good. And more than anything else, you couldn't rewind on it. If you ever wanted to rewind, You'd either have to take the tape out and spin it around on a pencil, and some of you do remember this, or you'd have to take it out and fast forward it and then take it out again and turn it around, and that would do the same thing as rewinding. So it was a really, really good machine, but in retrospect, it was kind of crappy. So over time, it got better. You know, it got colored plastic, it got thinner, we had Dolby C, we had Dolby B. We didn't quite know what they were, but we knew they were good. We added we had the radio to it, we got rechargeable batteries, and it got cheaper. So the first one was like $3,000, this one was about $100, and then over time it got better again. Like it got made out of aluminium, the battery power was amazing, it would last for like days, it would rewind, it would fast forward, it was really thin and stylish, and it was really cheap. You could buy these things from gas stations and lose it that day and not even be that bothered by it. So you see this process of the design getting better, and everyone in the entire portable music industry was working together on the same goal. Like everyone knew they had to make them smaller, cheaper, lighter, better. But just as the best ever Walkman came out, the worst ever Discman came out, the worst ever personal CD player. The worst ever personal CD player was incredibly expensive, with terrible battery life, and it was massive, but it was still better than the best ever Walkman. But we saw this leap. We saw this leap to a totally, totally different way to solve the same problem. Completely different technology was being used. Completely different parameters to now work around. Completely different experts were needed. And it's that paradigm shift which is interesting. It's that leap to a new evolutionary funnel, which I find absolutely fascinating. And we see this progression again in the world of personal CD players. So slowly they start off big and expensive, they get cheaper and thinner, they get radios added, you get anti-shock protection, so it stores the music somehow digitally, which means if you drop the thing, it still carries on playing. It gets remarkable. You get to the point where a few years later in, CD players are now very small, very cheap, very light, and everyone's using them. And then again, we see the same leap to MP3 players. The best ever personal CD player is still worse than the worst ever MP3 player. And we see this leap again. All of a sudden, these companies need different types of engineers. They need people to solve the problem of how do you get music onto the thing. They need to solve the problem of digital rights management. They need to solve the problem of creating storage to allow these devices to keep music. And this is what I'm calling the paradigm leap. So this switch from one evolutionary funnel with the same criteria that everyone is working towards to a completely different funnel with completely different criteria and a completely new solution. It's this paradigm leap that I think is fascinating. And we see this again and again and again and in many sectors. So MP3 players got better, and then we got the mobile phone, and all of a sudden we didn't need to keep music. We just would listen to streamed music wherever we were. We didn't need to buy music anymore. We would buy access to music. The entire world of music changed. It became entirely about a digital experience and user interfaces more than the hardware of making the thing. We see these same paradigm shifts everywhere. We have it in personal transportation. We had the era of the horse-drawn carriage, then the era of the horseless carriage, which looks very similar but without the horse. And then slowly they get better. They look less like carriages without horses and more like Honda Accords. And then they get better again, and we figure out ways to actually replace the entire propulsion system, not with petrol engines, but with electrically powered motors. And now we've got different problems to solve. How do we create a charging grid? How do we sell vehicles without a dealership network? And then the next paradigm shift will be extraordinary. Like, we may enter, and the timing is unknown, but it's assumed at some point we will reach Category 5 self-driving cars. And then everything changes again because we don't need to own the vehicles, because the time that we spend in the vehicles is now productive. And that means that cars don't need to look like cars anymore. Cars can look like lounges. Cars can be dentist chairs where we get our teeth fixed as we get to work. Everything suddenly changes in each paradigm. A few more examples without boring you too much. We see it in time. We had the era, I don't know if any of you remember this one, we had the era of sundials, and then we had the era of mechanical clocks. The mechanical clocks got small, so we started wearing them. And then just as mechanical clocks got really good, we had LCD clocks, which were much thinner and much more accurate and would last a long time. And then now we're kind of in the paradigm where we don't really need a watch. Like if you wear a watch today, it's not because you need to know the time, it's because you're making a status gesture to someone. You may have a luxury watch to tell people that you're doing it right. You may have a watch that monitors your heart rate because you really care about your personal data like that. But your choice to wear a watch is very different to before. You see them in currencies. We had the era of cowrie shells, then coins, then paper money, then digital money. And then now we're in this sort of weird hybrid area where we don't know whether the solution is a blockchain-based system or whether it's a new payment layer on top of other people's systems. There's a lot of complexity to the current environment. But it's worth figuring out that there are key differences between these types of currencies. Like coins had intrinsic value. Notes were promissory notes. Credit cards became linkage between something that existed on a server somewhere and a payment terminal. They may appear to be evolutions of each other, but they're actually huge shifts in the entire way that we think about each paradigm. There are many, many more examples of this, and if you're thinking on the plane on the way home tonight or as you're driving home, it's great to look around the world right now and think about these paradigm shifts everywhere. You get them in strange places, like in-flight entertainment on aircraft. It went from one TV in the middle of the aisle to a TV set that you could control, and then now modern aircraft don't even bother to put TVs. They provide Wi-Fi, and you're supposed to bring your own. We had the era of canal transportation, and then railways, and then roads, and then now we may leap to a paradigm of things like drones. What you find, and this is just a personal opinion, I believe that disruption is basically the process and the outcome of being the first entrant into a new paradigm. So it was Tesla that has disrupted the car market by looking at car production in a radically different way. In fact, their first ever attempt at a car, by some people's reckoning, was the best car the world had ever known. That's an extraordinary thing to do. When they launched, there was 100 years of collective experience in how to make a car. And in their very first vehicle, less than 2 years into their existence, they made a vehicle that challenged absolutely everyone's assumptions about what a car was. The Dyson vacuum cleaner. The average selling price of a Hoover before this was under $100, and this comes in at over $400 and completely takes the market. I actually worked in an electrical retailer as the Dyson came out, and no one ever came in shopping for vacuum cleaners before this. It was not a high-interest category. People did not have childhood goals of owning an expensive vacuum cleaner. It just wasn't how people were. This comes out, and people run to the store, desperate to try and see this new vacuum cleaner and touch it, and they spend over $400 in the process. This was the first vacuum cleaner made by James Dyson. This is the first smartphone made by Apple. I worked at Nokia at the time that this came out, and we knew on the day that it launched that it was going to change the entire marketplace because it was doing things that we'd only dreamed about doing. It's outrageous that a company like Nokia that had spent billions and billions and billions of dollars on R&D was somehow beaten to the first place by Apple making their very first handsets. We were putting out 73 different models of phones per year. They did one, and it changed everything. And you have to sort of ask yourself this question, really. Like, are these people lucky? Like, were they somehow able to kind of grasp hold of something that other people couldn't see? And I think it's easy to assume that they were successful, like, despite this lack of knowledge, despite this lack of expertise, despite this lack of experience. And I actually think they were successful because of it. Because we learn a lot in our jobs. We learn a lot about what's worked before and what people want, and we learn a lot about what is possible. and we carry this muscle memory with us every day we come to work. You hear people in the office saying, oh, we tried that before and it didn't work, or nobody wants this. And you realize sometimes expertise can be a really dangerous thing. You know, nobody at Coca-Cola would have ever made Red Bull because they would have put this through a testing process. And in the testing process, it would have been very apparent that it's very expensive, it looks awful, and it tastes awful. And that's not a particularly compelling focus group to then go back to your bosses and say, I think we should do this. There was no data. There was no trend line showing an interest in energy drinks. There are no PSFK trend reports about the need for more artificial coloring in our life. Like, this goes against everything, but somehow it worked. You know, Reed Hastings, who launched Netflix, he was not on the graduate training program at Fox Studios. He didn't start making films as a hobby. He was a teacher. He was a maths teacher that just had a better way to deliver movies. Mark Zuckerberg, you know, Facebook is a media company. It makes money from advertising. It is the world's largest media company. And yet his very first job in media has been to create the world's largest media company. And that's extraordinary. So I think my first point here from the first chapter is it's very useful to think about assumptions. Like, it's very useful to think about what we would do if we approached our jobs or our industries or our careers as very naive experts. If we had lots of enthusiasm, if we had a lot of charisma and a lot of passion, and we had a strong understanding of people, but we had no knowledge of doing that particular job before or working in that particular sector before, what would we create? Like, how would we make it? What would it look like? And that's quite an awkward question, but it's also very empowering. So that's the first thing I want you to take away. The second chapter here is about understanding digital transformation. And I am aware that both disruption and digital transformation are words that are used all the time, and they become somewhat meaningless in the degree to which they're overused. But I'm going to try and explain this in a way that hopefully will bring it to life. So we had an era that I'm calling the pre-digital age, or you could call it the analog age. And in this era, life was quite simple. Like, generally speaking, things around us worked. They did one thing very well. They weren't connected to each other. We would pick up a newspaper. We would know that it was a newspaper. It wouldn't sort of lose connectivity and stop working. You would turn on your TV, and it would work. It wouldn't wait for a software update. Everything was fine. There will be an age, I think, and I don't know when it's going to happen, but there will be a period in our life that I'm calling the post-digital age. And this is the kind of scenario you see in many films about the future. People wear white clothes and silver clothes, and doors sort of open automatically and make a really groovy sound as they do that. And this will be a time when we don't think about technology because technology just works. It may be that we enter our lounge and our living room lights come on based on the time of day it is. We may get in a vehicle, and the vehicle will start playing our favorite music automatically. We may be served ads which are not freaky in their personalization, but are somehow very relevant to that moment in time. So that's the post-digital age. I think we're in the interim. We're in the early stages of us making sense of what we have. We haven't got there yet. It's very complicated at the moment. We have to think a lot about technology. We have to think every time you turn on the TV, how is it that I get the thing I want? Which remote control do I have to use to get there? We see the blue screens of death around us. Lots of airports have extremely nice lounges with screens that have completely failed to update and no longer work, and you can miss your flight if you're not careful. We have lots of signs to help guide us through this world, like no Apple Pay. You can just see the desperation in the biro there. Like, lots of retailers are just incredibly frustrated with how the payment process has become and how fragmented it is. This is a takeaway restaurant where they have to have about 9 different iPads, each for a different food delivery app. And we tend to bring over this sort of this digital behavior we bring to the analog world without thinking about it. So this is someone buying a car, I think in America, and in order to buy it, they have to tick a box saying, I'm not a robot. which is quite odd, because if there was going to be something a robot's really good at, it's probably doing a tick. Like, that's probably the easiest test for it to pass. So I'm calling this the mid-digital age. It's this sort of chaotic, weird, slightly crappy, slightly frustrating thing where you can kind of see how it's going to go, but you're aware that we're not there yet. And I think we need to be mindful of this context when we do our jobs. And we need to be aware this is not a new thing. Like, every single profound technology that enters our lives tends to go through a process rather like this. Before the technology, life is simple. People make money. There's no complexity. There's very little conversation about that technology because we've made sense of it. Then it arrives, and all hell breaks loose, and everything's very complex. People don't tend to make that much money. There's lots of disagreements about what it means. No one can really make sense of it, and we tend to adapt what we've done before by sprinkling on this new technology around the way that we always did things. And then we have this era afterwards, the post-age, where we make sense of it, where it's simple, where it's customer-friendly, and where it's delightful. We see this happen a few times in history, by the way. This is early factories would have this thing down the factory called a line drive shaft. And this was the way that all equipment in the entire factory was powered. Huge pieces of machinery, very, very heavy, very expensive, great fire risk, very, very noisy, would create lots of vibrations. It was a really bad way to build a factory, but it was the only way that we could get power to all the individual machines. And this would be powered by a water wheel. Like, before the second industrial revolution, this was the only way to power the factories. So they would build these factories next to fast-flowing streams, and that's why towns would be built in the places that they were. The steam engine was invented. Everyone's very proud of this thing. It could turn things. I'm not very good at mechanical engineering, but it would turn things very quickly with a lot of torque behind it. And when people saw this, they were very excited, and they decided to use those steam powers to pump up water to power the same water wheels. So for about 30 years, steam engines were used to lift up water to power the water wheels, and everyone was very pleased with themselves because this was better. That doesn't make any sense in retrospect. To use something that can spin very fast to lift water to spin something quite slowly, if you ask me, is quite stupid. Finally, when they built brand new factories, they realized what they'd done, that actually they needed this big engine to power the line draft system directly. A few years later on, someone invents the electrical motor, an even cheaper way to turn power on, even quicker to turn on in the morning, required less maintenance, could power even more torque, could provide even more torque to the machinery. And after the advent of the electrical motor, this is what factories look like. They were exactly the same as what they'd done before. All they did is they took out the steam engine and replaced it with electrical motors. Now, when people built factories brand new, and in the knowledge that these motors existed, they looked like this. They were completely different. They suddenly realized that each individual piece of machinery could have its own motor. That actually this now meant that the fabrication techniques could advance such that factories could now make much better products that they could sell for far greater prices with much lower intolerances in the mechanical process. They realized that actually now these factories could look completely different. They no longer needed to be long and narrow with heavy walls. They could actually be large, expansive spaces. They could now move the machinery around to produce products in much more efficient ways. And actually the entire location of the factory could now shift because it didn't need to be near the source of water. It didn't need to be near the source of railways, which would provide the coal. Actually, the whole factories could move to be much closer to the ports. So when we added the technology to how we'd done things, nothing really changed, but people didn't realize that. It's only when things were constructed brand new for this era that we saw the real transformational power. And I think this is an important metaphor and allegory for how we think about the digital age. We keep on applying it to really old processes rather than working around the power of the new. I don't know if you can see this. Yes, you can. But a good way to think about this is to imagine companies as onions. They have these layers that are built on inner layers. At the very core of a business will be its business model, its kind of mission, the reason it exists. And then on top of that, companies make products or experiences based on those values and that belief. And once they've made these products or experiences, they then have to market them. They do the 4 Ps: price, promotion, placement, etc. And then on top of that, we do a communications layer. Now, what tends to happen is we tend to apply the technology to the outermost layer, because that's where it's easiest to do. You don't need cross-functional teams to sign it off. It's where it's most demonstrable to the market. It's very easy to showcase to the financial markets that you understand technology if it's most clearly visible. Whereas actually the real transformation happens when we adopt the technology much more at the core of a business, but that's much harder. But when you look at the companies that are the fastest growing companies the world have ever known, when you look at those that we celebrate, that we admire, that we want to learn from, these are not necessarily technology companies, but they are companies that have built themselves with that technology and that knowledge of customer behavior in the age of technology at the very core. And that's a really, really key thing to do. The deeper that you apply technology, the greater the benefit that you get. I think there are 2 different terms to understand. There's one which is called digitalization, which is to add technology to the way that things have been done before. And it's physical, and it's tangible, and it's quick, and it's easy, but it doesn't make much of a difference. That is digitalization. And then there's digital transformation, which is to completely rethink and rebuild what that business should be in the age of technology. This is digitalization. Every time you go to a store and there's an iPad in the corner that nobody uses, that is digitalization. This is digital transformation. This is a store in the UK called Ocado, where they've completely rebuilt the entire distribution chain and logistical backbone for a grocery retailer so it doesn't have stores. It doesn't stick products on shelves and then people go around them and pick them up. Instead, it delivers directly to people in a much more efficient way using that new technology at the core. This is a lovely KFC where they replicate the till system by providing kiosks for people to order burgers themselves. It's fine, but it doesn't serve more customers. It actually serves fewer customers. It's not a better customer experience because you have to do more effort yourself. To digitally transform a fast food restaurant, you create an app which allows yourself to order the products from wherever you are, go into a store and pick them up immediately without waiting. Or it allows you to sit down and for someone to deliver the food to you while you're in a restaurant, so the waiting process is much nicer. Digitalization of delivery restaurants is the picture we saw before. It's adding lots of apps to the existing way of doing it, whereas digital transformation is to have these things called dark kitchens. And dark kitchens do not have to adhere to the same regulation, they don't have to pay tax in the same way, and they are created to serve food much more efficiently to people. And this is a huge threat to most of the quick service restaurant industry. My final example of this comes from America. We still use checks in America, which is extraordinary to me. And because people hate checks, and because they take a long time to deposit, you can now take a photograph of a check and the paperwork is done by somebody else in another country. But we still write each other checks. That is digitalization. If we were to digitally transform it, we would completely rethink the whole process. We might use mobile payments. We might use some kind of cryptocurrency. Who knows? But it's to completely rethink the whole process. So this brings a few questions to light. What does this new technology make possible? What is it that exists in the world today that we're not using to make the most of our business? What new behaviors emerge as a result of that technology? What new expectations do people have? And knowing all that, how would you construct your company today? What would your company look like if you were to build it for this environment? So 6 quick things to learn. The first thing is technology is amazing. I think we often act as if we wish technology wasn't around us, especially people who work for big companies. It was the oil tube invention that allowed the Impressionist movement to develop. That's a lot of change from a very small change in packaging. It was the invention of the elevator that allowed cities to properly develop at height and that changed the whole social fabric social fabric of cities as it allowed wealthier people to move up to the higher floors in their apartments. We've had the internet, and we've got the mobile phone, and collectively, we act as if we wish it never happened. I'm not talking about you in this room right now because you have decided to come here. But as we do our normal jobs and we talk to other people in the real world, we will see a remarkable number of businesses that deep down act as if they wish the internet never happened. We have to unleash the power of the leapfrog. And this is particularly interesting in a market like Bahrain, where you don't have to rewire a legacy system. You are able to build yourself from scratch for the modern age and leapfrog a vast array of economies that invested at the wrong time in the wrong infrastructure. America has more retail space than any country on earth per person by a factor of 3. It's living with an infrastructure which is now dying because if you were to think about shopping today, you would not construct a mall. That is not how most people like to behave in the modern era. You would not construct cities around the vehicle because this is not a particularly socially wonderful way to live. You would rethink what cities would look like around public transport. Most developed nations have the slowest broadband speeds in the world. They tend to lag behind because they built their systems enthusiastically and with tons of money about 10 to 15 years ago, whereas those that are constructing afresh are now able to use 4G, or right now they can use 5G to completely leapfrog what's possible. So as I travel the world, I will see that the fastest trains I ever travel on will be in markets like China. The best mobile payment systems will be in countries like Estonia or Singapore or China. And we tend to find it's this process of undoing what we've done before, which tends to be the greatest barrier for change. Getting people to sort of unlearn, getting people to change is very hard because within it, there is this presumption that somehow people did something wrong. Like nobody in America did anything wrong by buying shopping malls. They made a great decision at the time based on the information they had. But it turns out in retrospect, it would have been better to start now. And that's a wonderful and empowering situation to be in. My third point of 6, focus on people, not technology. It's just that simple. In my main job, running innovation for Zenith, I get lots and lots of technology-focused briefs. Tom, what can we do with blockchain? Tom, how can we create a VR experience? Tom, please can you make a chatbot for us? Tom, what should we do with AI? This is a terrible way to think about innovation. Instead, know that we are in an environment where these technologies exist. Be massively curious about these technologies. Like, be enthusiastic, understand every single thing about them, but our job is to serve people. So how do we provide better customer service? How do we make it easier for someone to buy something? How do we make it easier for them to spend more money with us? How do we make it easier for them to spend less time with us? How do we create delight for them? How do we answer those questions in a world where technology exists? Number 4 of 6, real change takes depth. Like, it's really hard. Like, companies don't want to do this. I don't know if this was popular in this part of the world, but this is Pimp My Ride. It's a show where they would take a vehicle that looks like this, that barely works, and then they would make it look like this. It was a great TV show because it was full of people doing outrageous things with awful cars. And I think this is often the spirit that people do digital transformation and innovation. They do this very external, snazzy, glitzy, great for the press release type of innovation, and you actually know in a few days' time, like these vehicles, it's probably going to break down and not quite work. And actually, what they really should have done is bought a Hyundai Sonata. It would not make a great TV show, but it's a really, really good way to think about innovation. A lot of what we do is really creating a sort of nicer, more modern interface on a kind of existentially rubbish process. It's creating a much better website in terms of its design that still has the same, sorry, for exceptional reasons, you can't change your flight today, please phone up this number. It's lots and lots of garnish when the bottom stuff needs to be worked on. So it's incumbent on all of us to not only be thinking about making nice initial customer-facing layers, but actually doing the boring work of the plumbing and the infrastructure and the business model that lies beneath. Transformation does need a new mindset. Like, the reality is that many of the skills that have got us this place in life so far are increasingly not that helpful in the future. Like, things like being bold, things like taking risks, things like being agile, experimenting, making decisions on gut and not data, looking ahead, trying to find simplicity in a world of chaos. These are all wonderful, wonderful attributes for every single person to use in their role today. But these are very, very different skills to what's got us here. Like, all of these characteristics and all of these values are highly, highly, highly controversial in large, successful companies. And my last thing, like, there really are opportunities everywhere. Like, there's this strange notion that there's nothing new under the sun, or that all the inventions that have ever been made have already been made. And every year we realize that's not true at all. Like, we need to be aware that these opportunities to rethink things are everywhere. Like, education for me, if we are going to transform it, is not about distance learning and videos online and giving people iPads. It's completely rethinking what skills and what knowledge and what attributes our children will need to have in the future that we can't predict now. It's completely rethinking what it is that people should know. Like, rethinking finance is not just another way to change a payment layer. It's actually to really rethink the role that banks or insurance companies have in our life. How can they add much more value to us and make it easier for us and to be our kind of financial guardians? Like, rethinking housing is amazing. Like, what happens in a world where you can 3D print houses? What does the role of houses become in an era where we may commute in different ways, where we may work from home? There are so many different sectors that we can think about, whether it's automotive, whether it's governance, whether it's retail, transit. Like, it's incredibly exciting to think, what would a transit system look like if we were to start it now? How would we pay for it? It probably wouldn't be having a digital ticket on our phone. It would be some system where we get charged automatically based on how much travel we've done, which has been data that's provided from our phone based on GPS signals, and we would probably pay for it through our mobile phone companies. So there are lots and lots and lots of ways to rethink lots and lots of different industries. So my final slide here, I think change is really, really exciting. I think we need to be much more enthusiastic and optimistic about it. I think we need to be aware of these naive new companies that come into our industries and take us from the side. We need to think that digital business transformation is absolutely essential, and it's only going to become more essential. That real change does take real depth, and it is really hard, but it is worth doing. We do have to embrace this mindset of boldness and to take risks and to be challenging. But it's worth it, because there are opportunities everywhere. Like, this sounds quite cheesy, and being English, it's really hard to sound enthusiastic without sounding sarcastic at the same time. But this is an amazing time to be alive. It's an amazing time to be a human being, but it's also the best ever time to do every single job that we have. And I think that's a wonderful thing to think about. Thank you very much.